Welcome to this week's edition of Journalist Roundtable. I'm Francine Schertzer. Joining us today, Gillian McGoldrick with the Philadelphia Inquirer, Taylor Millard with the Delaware Valley Journal, and Stephen Caruso with Spotlight PA. Stephen, we're going to start with you. You'd written recently about the State House Democratic agenda. There was some polling on it. Can you talk a little bit about what type of issues are really the top of their agenda and how that has aligned with voters?
Well, it's interesting. So Spotlight did this poll. We were just trying to get this idea of how are voters responding to what it means to have Democrats control a chamber of the legislature in advance. What are some pretty normal Democratic priorities that have gotten some Republican votes? So we asked about universal background checks, a $15 minimum wage, and LGBTQ non-discrimination. It got 63% support from our poll. That included most Democrats, handful, I think 30% of Republicans, and about 55% of independents. Now, here's the thing. Issue polling, I think, is really hard. Spotlight also asked about some other questions that we've been doing stories on, from people's opinions on abortion access to how do school vouchers do, the idea of using taxpayer money to send people to private school. And, I think the main thing we can say is that the poll results were positive for House Democrats and some of the bills they passed. But even House Democrats are saying, well, we're actually not even campaigning on some of this stuff. I mean, I talked to a candidate in the Lehigh Valley who's like, yeah, this comes up, but mostly voters want to talk to me about education funding. That's something that in the budget deal agreed to by Democrats and Republicans. Education funding went up for public K through 12. And she's also talking about warehouse development, which is not something we polled on. So I guess I'd say is like, yeah, you put those three issues together, they polled well. If we were to have asked, do you support lowering taxes, lower regulations, and more law enforcement, which is what I assume Republicans might say is their statewide platform, that could probably hit 60% too. I think issue polling is really hard. This was our shot at it. It showed good results for Democrats, but to me, it's very noteworthy that these aren't even the issues that Democrats are always prioritizing when they go knock doors in the districts they're running in.
Now, as we are under a month away from the election day, Gillian, I want to shift focus to you for a moment. You had written recently about the top House races to watch in the State House, the State General Assembly. Can you talk a little bit about some of the races that are really being focused on right now, and also what is the likelihood that the House could potentially shift control?
Yeah, so the House currently, as you know, is only has a narrow Democratic majority, a one-seat majority. So because of that, really the power is up for grabs for either party at this time. I had gone through some of the 2022 data from redistricting and looked at which races are the most competitive going into the November 5th election. And I narrowed it down to 10. I believe Stephen has also done a similar story and may have had a couple more additional races, but I narrowed it down to 10. They're really all throughout the state. There are a number of lower Bucks County Republicans that Democrats are targeting. There is one Democrat in central Bucks County that Republicans are targeting. And then there's the lone rural Democrat Frank Burns, who we could talk about later too. But he is one of those seats that Republicans see as definitely flippable. And then there are a number of there's a competitive seat up in Erie. Representative Pizarro had been running for treasurer, had not been focused really on running for re-election for his state house seat, though he was running for both. It just is a competitive district, not necessarily to say that it's this race specifically is competitive. It just has a little bit more of a red tilt, and some other districts outside Pittsburgh.
Taylor, how would a shift in control in the state house change what issues rise to the top?
I think one thing you are going to see is more of a focus, at least this is what Republicans are claiming, there would be more of a focus on fiscal issues. Very recently, Pennsylvania had its credit rating upgraded from AA3 to AA2 by Moody's, and Moody's said that, hey, this is going to provide important flexibility in the event of a future budget stress. If you look at the budget that the governor put forward this year and may end up putting forward going into next year, he's really been focused on higher spending. And Republicans in the House have said this spending isn't going to work. You're going to drain the surplus that's been left over from pandemic-related federal funding. Also, commentary from the independent fiscal officer, the independent fiscal office making similar warnings saying that, hey, be careful about the spending because that $6.6 billion surplus is going to disappear next year.
What type of... Go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to jump in. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing with the state's budgeting right now is that the state has a lot of money in its reserves. It's about $11 billion total, split between money sitting in the general fund, basically the state's checking account, and then about $6.6 billion in the rainy day fund, a savings account. And that's a lot of money, but when the state's general fund spend is at $47 billion every year, $11 billion is just a fraction of that. And obviously there's a lot of things that are saying they've been underfunded in the last couple of years. I mean, K through 12 is a main thing, but right now there's this ongoing issue of public transit funding with SEPTA claiming, that they need more operating funding. I think every year, every budget cycle is different lobbies coming out and saying we need more money for home care, we need more money for health insurance, for housing. And, so 11 billion gets mopped up really quickly once everybody is making their ass during budget season.
Especially because there are questions about whether the money that's in the rainy day fund can actually be spent in a regular budget cycle. Governor Shapiro has said that, yeah, it can be spent, but you've got other groups, Republicans, also the Commonwealth Foundation has really been pushing this narrative, which is it can't be spent unless it's in a true fiscal emergency, and those conditions don't exist right now.
I'd like to shift back for just a moment as we're talking about some potentially targeted races in the state house in particular. Taylor, you had written about Representative Jennifer O'Mara refusing to participate in a debate sponsored by the League of Women Voters. Why is she not going to participate in that event?
Well, it was a forum, not necessarily a debate, and all she said to the League of Women Voters was, "I don't have time. My scheduling issues my schedule just didn't work." Reached out to her campaign to get a comment on that, and they did not reply. However, that's what they said to the League of Women Voters, or what the League of Women Voters said that the campaign said, which was, we don't have time for it. We got stuff to do.
Perhaps more broadly, is it advantageous for incumbents to not debate?
I really think so when you look at that, especially if it's kind of more of a comfortable race, or not necessarily a comfortable race, but a race where you're expected or likely to win re-election or election. It's easier to just rely on your name value or rely on the ads you put out to get people to go out to vote, especially if you're a known quantity. And as somebody who is looking for, I believe it's her fourth term in office, she's a known quantity, and people know the name. They go in, they say, okay, yeah, I want her to continue.
Now, Gillian, a moment ago, you had referenced Representative Frank Burns, who's also seeking re-election to his House seat. You'd characterize his campaign as being, quote, Trump style, end quote, particularly for his views on refugees and immigration. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamics of his run for re-election?
Yeah, Representative Frank Burns represents the Johnstown area in Western Pennsylvania. He's one of few rural Democrats left. Almost all of them have flipped at this point. And part of that means that he has to shift the way he speaks, whether he would like to admit that he is shifting the way he speaks or if this is truly how he speaks. But so one of his attack ads that he has out right now against the Republican candidate that is challenging him, Amy Bradley, is essentially accusing her of trying to bring in Afghan refugees into the community that could not support them. The ad also references like secure borders and illegal immigration. Obviously, that is not an issue that I think the way I put it in the story is that the U.S.-Mexico border is not really near Johnstown. But obviously it is an issue that has come up a lot in former President Trump's campaign. That is definitely interesting to hear from a Democrat. As I was talking to different refugee organizations that resettle refugees, they were shocked to hear it was that rhetoric coming from a Democrat, and asked pretty bluntly, like, "Why are you a Democrat?" And he says that he truly believes in that it is the party of working people, and that corporations do not have the best interest at heart for working people.
How do Representative Burns' views mesh with the House Democratic Caucus?
He's been the lone no vote on a lot of things. He's proudly blocked some legislation at times, particularly one vote about changing the number of votes needed to get on the Board of Pardons, or to receive clemency from the Board of Pardons. And they have also had to tap the two of the lower Bucks Republicans in very competitive districts to be able to pass some of their more socially liberal agenda proposals, particularly the Fairness Act, which was about removing or essentially prohibiting discrimination based on someone's gender expression, their sexuality, and yeah. That's it.
Governor Josh Shapiro has been campaigning on behalf of House Democrats. How influential has he been?
Do you want to take this, Stephen, or do you want me?
Well, I guess I'd say, like, I think it's hard to say so far. I mean, Shapiro is a very popular governor. Most polls have shown this. He usually has approval ratings within 55, 60%. We haven't seen any of his money be put into these races yet. Shapiro's a very strong fundraiser, from national groups from California to Texas to New York City to Philadelphia. And, I think that's a big dynamic I'm watching. For instance, he threw his weight into the state Senate, the upper chamber where Republicans still control it. He backed 4 candidates who are some of the most important for Democrats if they want to try and tie the chamber, which would effectively let them control it. But I think that's one of the biggest questions, is how much weight does Josh Shapiro wield in these state level races? Like, where's the edge of his brand?
Now, Stephen, as we were talking about different House races being targeted, are there any particular ones that you're watching?
I think Gillian ran down the big ones. I listed some extra ones in a story, but I also think target Pennsylvania State House races are very small, 64,000 people. There's a lot of room for individual candidates and individual message to break through or not break through. A largish amount of money at the right time with the right message can make a difference. I want to say I really love Gillian's story on Frank Burns. He's such a fascinating character in the legislature. I think what I'd say is, he has been very proud to sort of vote against things like gun control, but Democrats have also been advancing a lot of bills that I think are trying to advance similar to Bidenomics, this economically populist message about bans on doctors having non-competes, more restrictions for hospitals. They passed a bill this week to they're positioning a bill on trying to make it easier for you to cancel subscriptions online. They were kind of taking up these consumer-focused events to really build on this, I think, national Democratic idea that Democrats stand for, not just the little guy, the worker, but for you to feel like you're getting a more fair shake out of the economy. And I think he's probably pretty happy to vote for those. He's voted for pretty much all of them. And they brought along a lot of Republicans too. So that's definitely something I'm curious how that plays in all these small districts.
Is it really, though, that surprising to see certain Democrats take more of a hawkish move on the border? You look at what national Democrats have done. The White House announced that it was going to reinstate some Trump-era immigration policies due to people believing that there really was a migrant crisis. And certainly people can debate whether there is one or not. I think the evidence suggests there is kind of more of one than not. But is it really that surprising to see this rhetoric change happen in certain issues?
I'd say so, but only at the state house level. I find it fascinating when we're seeing national issues come down to the local level. The state house truly, besides some resolutions or some maybe financial decisions, they really don't have much control over the status of the border at this time. So I find it very interesting. But again, I agree that it is not surprising to see Democrats realize that this is an issue that voters really care about. But at the same time, I'm interested to see that a Democrat for a state house seat is making this argument.
And I think on the converse, it's also interesting seeing a Republican who was kind of willing to co-sign the idea of bringing migrants in. I mean, immigration is always this issue that kind of pits like two different sides of business against each other, like, or not business per se, but within the Republican establishment, you see groups, more libertarian-backed groups who support immigration, pointing to statistics and saying like this helps everyone, except for maybe the lowest earners, and then but then more of a nationalistic focus that says actually no, we need to protect our benefits, we need America to be for Americans, concerns about crime and whatnot, most of it not really borne out in statistics, but that's a debate I think within the Republican Party. And to see Trump back someone who almost seemed to throw in there a lot with that Chamber of Commerce view of no, more people coming is good, particularly for a rundown, Johnstown's a lovely place, but an old steel town like Johnstown, I think that I think that the converse was also interesting. A Democrat seizing on immigration, a Republican who is willing to talk about that.
I mean, in 2016, you did have, or maybe it was like 2015, you had Bernie Sanders tell Vox that the idea of open borders was a Koch brothers thing. So, and obviously he said, okay, yeah, I want to accept refugees. I want people to come in, but it's not surprising to see either party decide to get into a huge fight about it, especially if they're going for union voters, which a lot of them have focused on these days.
Gillian, if I can come back to you for a moment, you'd also written about Senate Democrats who say that they think they might be able to tie the Senate chamber for the first time in roughly 30 years. Why are they hopeful?
Yeah, they are hopeful for a couple of reasons. There's only half the Senate is up for re-election and the 50-person body of the Senate. So they think they can flip 3 to 4 seats this time around. And if they flipped 3, that would make it a tie. And I feel very confident, Stephen, you had mentioned this earlier. I feel very confident that actually if the state Senate were to be tied, that there is actually no mechanism to break a tie. Like the lieutenant governor does not, according to the state constitution, does not actually allow for them to break a tie. So Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis would not play that like VP role. So a tied chamber would just kind of be hell. They would still need a majority of the votes to get anything. Am I allowed to say hell?
We're cable. It's all good.
So sorry. But so that is one thing. They think that they can flip at least this seat outside of Harrisburg, currently held by Senator DeSanto. He is retiring. He's a Republican, and after he decided to leave the legislature, that seat is pretty safely D at this point. And then there are a couple of others around the state that Democrats think they have an in for, but there are also several Republican seats that the Republicans think that they will actually pick up seats in the end, which is also very possible. It just depends on like who is turning out, whether people are ticket splitting on election day or up to election day.
Yeah,
if you don't mind me asking, Stephen, go ahead.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Okay, I was going to say, what do you guys think of the Jimmy Dillon race? Because that's gotten a lot of attention recently with the tweet where it turns out that some racial epithets were being issued on a Twitter account that he ran, and obviously he said that, hey, it was students or it was basketball players who were doing this, not me. Where do y'all see this going?
I think that's a tough race. Sorry, Joey. I know. Look, that is an interesting race. I know Republicans have been interested in it for a while. Northeast Philly is a fascinating area. It's a inner. It's like a inner city suburb in the sense of it's within the city bounds, but it attracts a lot of people who like being in Philadelphia but don't want to be near the hustle and bustle of Center City. A lot of cops, a lot of firefighters, a lot of folks who are, I think, like Republicans have historically performed best up in Northeast Philadelphia. So then by the numbers, I'm not an expert on exactly the DPI of it all, but I think it makes sense. And I've heard anecdotally that is an area where Republicans think they can make gains up and down the ticket. Now, I think if that seat flips, it means Republicans are having a very, very good night. I think that, this is the sort of news cycle around Senator Dillon that, you don't want to have. But also, as we've seen, voters are very forgiving, particularly if you have the right letter next to your name.
Yeah, I would add to Senator Dillon was first elected in 2022, so I don't think in a special election. So I don't think that voters really have the connection. This could be the old tweets that, although he says he didn't post, they could make him pay a price. I know that I have also seen some ads about an old arrest warrant in New Jersey for not paying a ticket or paying parking tickets, traffic tickets. And I do think that the SRCC has been doing a great job of putting a picture into voters' minds of who he is before he was ever able to make one for them.
If both chambers, the House and Senate, were either to go one direction or the other, either all Republican or all Democratic, how would that change the way the governor would have to negotiate moving forward, particularly for his budgets?
Well, I would say that, in some ways that would be normal in the sense of Governor Tom Wolf had 8 years of dealing with Republican-controlled legislature. It gives Republicans more leverage. It means that Shapiro's bigger asks are either not going to happen unless he gives more. I think also we'd probably see a return of constitutional amendments from Republicans as a way to try and legislate if Shapiro isn't willing to play ball, though I'd say that Shapiro has really gone out of his way to try and present himself as a bipartisan governor, a governor who wants to bring Republicans and Democrats into the fold under a common agenda. So in many ways, I think Shapiro would probably be able to work with either. I'd be very interested if Democrats somehow got together the right election to get the Senate into a tie. As Gillian said, the lieutenant governor can't break a tie on a bill, but they can break procedural ties. So they basically control the agenda. It's just on that final vote, it gets weird and you have to cut a lot of deals. That would be a fascinating situation, but it seems unlikely given where races are going. But I would honestly, if Shapiro was dealing with two Democratic chambers, that would present an interesting scenario of like, where is he really willing to push the envelope to go along with Democrats who have a lot of pent-up demand to pass things versus where is he going to actually want to hold back to keep building his centrist moderate image?
We only have
One thing I would be curious to find out. Actually, go right ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, please, Taylor.
Oh, and I was going to say one thing I'd be interested in finding out is whether the push for school choice and school vouchers makes headway if it turns out that Shapiro has to deal with a Republican-controlled legislature, unless, of course, he decides to take a page out of Tom Wolf and start issuing executive orders to make decisions on stuff like Pennsylvania was entered into RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, by an executive order by Governor Wolf. So I wonder if Shapiro would be willing to do that.
We only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to just move briefly through the row offices as well, because those haven't gotten as much attention as races for president, for U.S. Senate, and so forth. Stephen, you had written particularly about who's funding those three races. So I want to go through each row office just briefly. First of all, for the race for Auditor General, you note that incumbent Tim DeFore has raised significantly less than the Democratic candidate, Malcolm Kenyatta. What do you think about that dynamic?
Look, I think on all these races, it's definitely a little tricky because they don't track as much attention, but I think that makes sense. Kenyatta's a national name. He's put himself out there on cable news a lot. DeFore is the incumbent, but DeFore also did not have the most money when he won in 2020, and also we're waiting to see what Commonwealth Leaders Fund ends up spending. That's the big group backed by Jeff Yass. They have an ability to bring a lot of money very quick. That could change things quickly.
I'd like to look now at the race for Attorney General. Democratic candidate Jean DePasquale raised millions, while wealthy donors and national political action committees have funded ads for Republican candidate Dave Sunday. Gillian, you've written specifically about Jeffrey Yass funding the Dave Sunday campaign. Can you make the connection? Jeff Yass is typically known for his support of school vouchers. How does that connect with somebody running for Attorney General?
Yeah, so his overarching main thing that he supports is school choice. That is where he puts a lot of his money. But he also often will support Republican candidates. He'll support any candidate if they support school choice, but he also supports Republican candidates. So he, as Stephen had mentioned, he largely funds the Commonwealth Leaders PAC. That is the PAC that is mostly, at least half of the ad buys so far by what was the total number? I think it came up to $12 million in ad reserves by Republicans for Sunday. It was about half of that. The other half had been saved by the Republican Attorneys General Association. They're a big PAC that usually picks a couple of attorney general races that they think that they can flip because obviously it benefits them to have a Republican in the chair.
And finally, in the treasurer's race, Republican incumbent Stacey Garrity is receiving funding from unions that typically fund Democratic candidates. Erin McClelland was in the news recently because Governor Shapiro is not endorsing her. Somebody wanted to talk a little bit about the dynamics of this race.
One of the things I can talk about McClellan and Shapiro's relationship. This partially has to do with the fact that McClellan said she did not want Shapiro to be on the ticket with Kamala Harris, the Democratic National ticket. And what it looks like is that could be payback for it when you have somebody who just came out and, especially somebody from a home state came out and just made that comment that, nope, don't want him to be vice president. This is a terrible idea, and she could be reaping what she sowed on that. Stacey Garrity is very good at getting out the message on how much money she is filling into the general fund or how she's saving money for people. So that would be you've got the incumbent, the advantage of the incumbent having the name and being able to say, hey, I'm doing this, and put out a press release to basically sway voters.
That will have to be the last word. Our guests have been Gillian McGoldrick with the Philadelphia Inquirer, Taylor Millard with the Delaware Valley Journal, and Stephen Caruso with Spotlight PA. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for joining us.